In this family, love had a price. And he was the one they were willing to sell. The marble was cold through the thin soles of his shoes. That was the first thing Haewon understood. Cold marble. Smooth, polished, expensive in the way that things built to impress always were. His feet registered the temperature before his mind registered anything else, and his mind was not working the way it usually did, because something was wrong. Something had been wrong since the car. Since the silk. Since the ring. He stood very still in the middle of a room he could not see, and he tried to understand where he was. The air was different here. Not the close, stale air of the Han household with its old furniture smell, and its tension that clung to every wall. This air was cool and clean and carried something underneath it, cedarwood, maybe, and something metallic and cold, the way the air smelled before rain. The ceiling was high. He could tell by the way sound moved, how his own shallow breathing returned to him from a distance. The room swallowed noise the way very large, very expensive rooms did. Everything he heard was muffled, softened, like the space itself had been designed to contain things. His hands moved at his sides without his permission. Half signs. The unconscious muscle memory of a man whose hands were his only voice, reaching for a language nobody here would know. He stopped them, pressed his palms flat against his thighs and told himself to be still. Before we dive into today's story, smash that like button and hit subscribe so you never miss a powerful moment like this. And tell me, what country are you watching from? I love seeing our family grow worldwide. There was a ring on his finger. He had not put it there. It sat on his left hand, thin and gold and unfamiliar, and every time his thumb found it, which it kept doing, involuntarily, the way a tongue finds a sore tooth, his chest tightened. His stepmother had pressed it on him before the car. Had not explained. Had smoothed the front of his silk shirt instead, tugged the collar straight, looked at him with those flat, assessing eyes, and said nothing. His father had not come to the door at all. He had thought it was a dinner. He had thought, the way a person thinks when no one has told them otherwise, that this was some formal obligation, some event a family required his presence at for reasons that would eventually become clear. He was used to not being told things. He was used to being positioned and dressed and moved like a piece on a board that other people were playing. But this was not a dinner. He could feel that now. In the quality of the silence. In the unfamiliar hands that had guided him from the car to the entrance of this place, the way those hands belonged to people who moved with purpose and said nothing. In the ring he hadn't chosen and the silk he hadn't chosen and the fact that he was standing alone in the center of a room that felt like it belonged to someone with absolute, unquestioned power. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Each step landed with the calm certainty of a man who had never once in his life needed to rush, because everything and everyone around him simply waited. The steps came closer and then stopped. Somewhere in front of him. Close enough that Haewon felt the shift in the air, the slight change in temperature that a body creates when it enters your space. Silence. Whoever it was said nothing. Did not announce himself. Did not begin whatever ceremony or obligation or transaction had brought Haewon here. He simply stood there, and the quality of his stillness was not the stillness of a man waiting. It was the stillness of a man who had already seen everything he needed to see, and was deciding what to do about it. Haewon's throat tightened. His hands pressed harder against his thighs. And in the dark behind his eyes, where every other sense had learned to be loud in the absence of sight, he understood one thing with a clarity that felt like cold water poured down his spine. This man already knew something. Something that the rest of the people in this room, the quiet staff, the distant officials, the machinery of whatever was happening tonight, did not know. Or would not say. And he had not said a single word yet. The ceremony was short. Haewon understood that much. There was a voice, an older man, formal, reading from something in a tone that moved through the words quickly, efficiently, like a man completing a transaction rather than witnessing one. There were documents. Someone guided Haewon's hand to a surface, pressed a pen into his fingers. He signed where the pressure told him to sign. He did not know what he was signing. His hand moved because it was moved, the way it always had, the way his entire life had always worked. Then the ring. His hand was lifted. Fingers closed around his. And for one moment, one single, suspended moment, the grip paused. It was not a long pause. Half a breath. The kind of pause a man makes when something surprises him and his body registers it before his control catches up. Haewon felt it in the pressure of those fingers around his, the very slight change in tension, and then it was gone. The ring was seated on his finger over the one already there, and the hand released him. The official's voice completed its final line. The room shifted. The machinery of the evening began to wind down. And through all of it, the man who had stood in front of Haewon said nothing directly to him. Not one word. Not one gesture. Haewon tracked him by sound, by the low exchange of words with someone across the room, by the particular direction footsteps moved when they carried authority rather than service. He did not come close again. He did not acknowledge the ceremony beyond what was required of him. An older woman appeared at Haewon's elbow. Her hands were efficient, and her grip was certain, and when she took his arm to guide him it was not the grip of someone handling something fragile. It was the grip of someone who respected a person's ability to walk on their own while still making sure they did not walk into a wall. Haewon noticed the difference immediately. It was not a small difference. She brought him to a room that smelled like clean linen and warm wood. She pressed something warm into his hands, a cup, ceramic, smooth, and the heat of it traveled up through his palms and into his wrists, and Haewon stood there holding it and did not know what to do, because no one had handed him something warm in a long time. Not like this. Not with the specific casualness of someone who simply thought he might want it. He stood in the middle of that room for a long time after she left. The cup grew less warm. He did not drink from it. He just held it, and tried to locate himself inside the events of the evening, tried to arrange what had happened into an order that made sense. He could not. Somewhere else in that estate, behind a door Haewon would not have been able to find, a man stood in a room that smelled like leather and old paper and power. He stood at his desk with a phone in his hand and he looked at the wall in front of him for a moment that his lieutenant, standing 3 feet away, would later describe as the most unsettling pause he had ever witnessed. Then Kang Sunwoo raised the phone and made a call. It rang once. 3 words. That was all. 3 words delivered in a voice that carried no heat, no urgency, no emotion whatsoever, which somehow made them sound more absolute than a shout. Find Han Jae-won. He ended the call, set the phone down, and returned to the paperwork on his desk as though the evening had proceeded exactly as expected. As though nothing at all had surprised him. But back in that clean-lined room, Han Haewon stood in the dark behind his eyes, holding a warm cup and wearing a ring he had not chosen, and somewhere deep in the part of him that had learned to read the world through means other than sight, something told him that the man who had just bound himself to him in paper and ceremony already knew far more than he should. He knew his real name. Not the one they had dressed him in tonight. His real name. The one that meant second son. The one that meant inconvenient. The one that, until tonight, had never mattered to anyone powerful enough to do anything about it. Morning came through his skin before it came through any other sense. Warmth on his left cheek. The particular, directional warmth of sunlight through glass, which moved differently than artificial light, which carried a weight that bulbs never managed. Haewon lay still in the unfamiliar bed and let himself be certain of it. Sunlight. Morning. He had slept, which surprised him. He had not expected to sleep. The housekeeper, he did not know her name yet, came for him after what he judged to be another hour. Her knock was 3 clean raps, a specific rhythm, and when she opened the door she tapped twice on the doorframe before entering, a sound pattern that told him someone was there without requiring him to startle. He did not know if she had been instructed to do that, or if she had figured it out herself. Either way, he filed it. She brought him to a study. He knew it was a study before he crossed the threshold. The smell told him, old books, and ink, and something like the interior of a watch, clean metal and precision. The floor changed from hardwood to a thick rug and the sound of his footsteps disappeared entirely. The room was quiet in a specific way, the way rooms were quiet when the person inside them had been sitting still long enough to let the air settle around them. He was guided to a chair. He sat. He waited. A sound across the desk. Deliberate. The clean, soft knock of an object being placed on a surface. Then nothing. Haewon reached forward. His fingers found the edge of a desk, moved carefully along it, and made contact with something smooth and rectangular. A notepad. And just below it, a pen, set parallel to the pad's spine. He stopped. He sat with his hands on those objects, and he did not move for several seconds, because the fact of them, the fact that they were there, already there, placed there before he arrived, was doing something to the careful structure he had built around himself to get through moments like this one. Nobody prepared for him. Nobody thought ahead about what he would need and put it there quietly, without ceremony, without wanting credit for the consideration. Nobody did that. A voice came from across the desk. Low. Unhurried. The same voice from last night, though he had not heard it directed at him before. It moved carefully, deliberately, the way a man spoke when he understood that the person across from him was reading more than just words. Kang Sunwoo told him he knew. He did not ease into it. Did not build toward it. He said it plainly, that the man delivered to his estate last night was not Han Jae-won. That the Han family had made a substitution without the knowledge or consent of the person they had substituted. That Haewon had been brought here under false pretenses that had nothing to do with any choice Haewon himself had made. Haewon sat absolutely still. Sunwoo continued. 2 options. He would arrange for Haewon to be returned to the Han household, safely, immediately, the matter dissolved. Or Haewon could remain, here, under the protection of this house, while Sunwoo handled what needed to be handled regarding the Han family's conduct. No conditions attached to either choice. No pressure toward one direction. The notepad was there if Haewon wanted to respond. He slid it forward. The pen was already in Haewon's hand. He did not remember picking it up. His fingers were around it, and the pad was under his palm, and the room was so quiet he could hear his own pulse, high in his ears, and his hand was shaking. Not visibly. But the tremor was there, running through his fingers, because the last time someone had offered him a choice, a real one, with no hidden weight on one side, he could not remember when that had been. He bent over the paper. He wrote one word. He pushed the notepad back across the desk. There was a silence. Clean and complete. The sound of a man reading a single word and sitting with what it meant. Then the air in the room changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It simply shifted, the way the pressure shifts before a door opens onto somewhere entirely new. And Haewon sat with his hands in his lap and understood that whatever his life had been before this moment, it would not be that anymore. He stayed. That was the word he had written. One word, in the center of a blank page, pressed with more certainty than his shaking hand had any right to produce. Stay. And by morning it had already begun to mean something he had not anticipated, because the house, this cold, precise, intimidating house, had started, quietly and without announcement, to rearrange itself around him. Madame Yoon. That was her name. She told him herself, by pressing his fingers gently to her name tag on the first full morning, and then she signed it. Not perfectly. The motion was new-formed, a little stiff, the sign for the syllables of her name shaped by a hand that had learned them recently, and was still building the muscle memory. But she signed it, and when she saw that Haewon understood, she gave a short, satisfied nod and moved on to showing him the layout of the hallways like a woman with a schedule to keep. She learned fast. Faster than anyone Haewon had ever met. By the second day she had picked up 30 signs. By the third she had stopped using the notepad for basic communication almost entirely. She just signed at him, brisk and practical and a little bossy in a way that startled something loose in Haewon's chest, because it was so utterly matter-of-fact, as though accommodating him was simply the obvious thing to do, and she had no patience for making it complicated. He asked for a piano through the notepad, haltingly, with 3 false starts and 2 crossed-out words before he got the sentence right, because asking for things did not come easily to him. He was used to needs going unacknowledged. He had learned, over years, to want less, so the gap between wanting and receiving felt smaller. The piano arrived that same afternoon. He heard it being brought in, the particular effort of several people moving something heavy, the low communication between them, the final solid sound of it being set in a room 2 doors down from his. Madame Yoon came to collect him, brought him to the room, set his hand on the edge of the instrument, and then stepped back. He stood with his fingers on the wood casing for a long moment. Then he sat. Then he played. He did not play anything complete. Just fragments. Testing the instrument's sound, its response, the specific weight of its keys under his hands. Music was not something he performed for audiences. Music was the language that lived inside him when sign language wasn't enough and writing was too slow, and every other form of communication felt like putting something real into a box that was too small for it. He was in the 3rd fragment, something that moved between a folk melody and something entirely his own, when the bench shifted. Not much. Just slightly. The very careful, deliberate shift of a small body settling its weight at the far end of the bench, as far from Haewon as the bench allowed, so as not to crowd him. Not touching. Just present. He kept playing. He did not stop or turn or acknowledge the presence, because something told him that acknowledgement might break it. He simply continued, and the small body at the other end of the bench continued to sit, and the room held both of them in its quiet. Jiho. He would learn the name later. He would learn that the boy was 10 years old and had not spoken in 2 years, and that the staff moved around him with the specific gentleness of people who had watched a child become very small inside himself, and didn't know how to reach him. He would learn all of that later. Right now he only knew there was a child on his bench, sitting in chosen silence beside another kind of chosen silence, and somewhere in the back of his mind, that meant something he didn't have words for yet. He played until the fragment became something fuller, something that grew on its own the way music did when it decided to. And when it ended, the room went soft and still. And somewhere near the door, a presence. A stillness that was not the boy's, that was larger and colder and more careful. A presence that had been there for some time and had not made itself known, and which was, even now, choosing to say nothing. When Haewon turned his face toward the doorway, there was no sound. Nothing confirmed it. But the air in the room had the particular quality of a space that had just become 1 person smaller. And that absence felt, against everything logical, louder than a voice. It started with the notepad. That was how everything between them started. Careful words on paper, passed back and forth across the desk in Sunwoo's study during the morning meetings that had become, without either of them formally deciding so, a daily occurrence. Sunwoo would request Haewon's presence through Madame Yoon. Haewon would come. They would sit on opposite sides of the desk and Sunwoo would update him, in plain language, on what was happening with the Han family matter, and Haewon would read and occasionally write something back, and the exchanges were professional and measured and entirely unlike anything Haewon had experienced before. Nobody had ever given him updates. Nobody had ever spoken to him like a person who deserved to know what was being done in his name. Then the sign language happened. It was a Thursday morning, 6 days after Haewon's arrival, and Sunwoo reached the end of his spoken update, and instead of reaching for the notepad, his hand came up. Slow. Deliberate. And he signed, imperfectly, with the careful concentration of a man whose hands were more accustomed to contracts and commands than to the architecture of this particular language. The words, "How are you today?" Haewon went completely still. The sign was slightly wrong. The handshake for the last word was off by the placement of 1 finger. But the intent was absolutely clear, and the effort behind it was clearer still, because a man like Kang Sunwoo did not learn anything casually. He learned things because he had decided they were necessary. He had decided this was necessary. Haewon's hands rose. He signed back, slowly, watching Sunwoo's face to calibrate how much the man could follow. Better than yesterday, he signed. The cedarwood in this room helps. Something moved in Sunwoo's expression. Not a smile. Not quite. But the lines of his face shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something that was fractionally less closed than before. They began to talk. Not quickly. Not easily. With long pauses while Sunwoo worked out a sign he hadn't learned yet, while Haewon found the written shorthand for something too complex to convey with the vocabulary they currently shared. But they talked, and the conversation went places Haewon had not expected. Sunwoo quoted Zhang Qiu, a Joseon-era poet, a line about the way rivers remember mountains even after they leave them. His signing of the passage was halting, but the words he chose were exact. Haewon's hands corrected one character in the translation. Gently. The formal version you used, he signed, changes the river's feeling from longing to acceptance. They are not the same river. A pause. Then Sunwoo looked at him in a way that went very still, the kind of still that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with attention. He wrote on the notepad, "Where did you study classical Korean literature?" Haewon almost laughed. He could feel the shape of it in his chest, this unfamiliar almost laugh. "On my own," he wrote back. "My family's library." There was nothing else to do in there. The room held that answer for a moment. Jiho came in mid-morning, uninvited, with the quiet confidence of a child who had decided a place was his by right of presence. He climbed onto the chair beside Haewon, not beside Sunwoo, which made Madame Yoon, watching from the doorway, press her lips together in something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. The gift appeared 2 days later. Haewon found it when he sat at the piano for his morning practice. His fingers landed on something that should not have been there, something flat and slightly textured on the bench beside him. He lifted it carefully, ran his fingers across the surface and understood Braille. A music score. The specific piece, the fragment he had been building, the one he had played only here, only in this house, the one that was not finished because he had never finished it, was transcribed here in full. Not just the notes he had played. An extension. A suggestion for where the melody might go next, written in small Braille beneath the transcribed melody, marked with a question mark. His throat closed. He sat with the score in his hands and he did not play and he did not move and he tried to locate himself inside what it meant that someone had listened closely enough to transcribe something he had never meant anyone to keep, and had then offered the fragment back to him with a question rather than an answer. Later that afternoon, in the study, Sunwoo reached past Haewon to indicate something on the open score between them, a note on the arrangement, and his hand brushed Haewon's where it rested on the page. The contact lasted less than a second. Either of them moved away. Either of them moved away. That night, the last thing that happened was small and enormous at the same time. Haewon was leaving the study, navigating the familiar path to the door, when Sunwoo spoke. Not written. Not signed through the careful vocabulary they were building. He signed Haewon's name. Just that. One word. His name, shaped by hands that had taught themselves this language in secret, in whatever hours existed outside the ones they shared. It moved through Haewon like a key finding a lock he had not known was there. Like the first note of something that had no end yet. Like being seen by someone whose eyes, when they found you, did not look away. He walked to his room and stood in the middle of it in the dark and pressed both palms flat against his sternum, where the feeling lived, and understood that he was in an enormous amount of trouble. And if your chest just did what his did, if something just shifted in you the way it shifted in him, then you already know this story has only just reached a place where it gets dangerous. Drop a comment right now and tell us, are you on Sunwoo's side, Haewon's side, or are you already gone for both of them? Madame Yoon's hands were shaking. That was the first thing Haewon felt, not heard, not saw, but felt, because her hands were on his shoulders when it happened, steadying him as he navigated the turn from the hallway into the sitting room, and then the vibration hit the floor. Low. Deep. The kind of vibration that did not come from music, or traffic, or anything ordinary. It came from a voice. One voice somewhere in the east wing of the estate, delivering words at a volume and a frequency that traveled through walls and flooring and the soles of Haewon's shoes and arrived in his body as pure, undiluted fury. Sunwoo's voice. He recognized it the way he recognized thunder, by what it did to the air around it. Madame Yoon's hands tightened on his shoulders. Just for a second. Then she released him, guided him to a chair, pressed his hand to the armrest so he knew where he was, and left. Her footsteps were fast. Faster than her normal pace, which was already efficient. The door behind her did not click shut the way it usually did. It closed with the specific controlled care of a person who did not want to make any additional noise in a house that was already too loud with something unseen. Haewon sat in the chair and he waited and he listened with everything he had. He could not hear words. Only register. Only temperature. The vibration of a conversation conducted in controlled anger through walls that were too thick for language and too thin for silence. It lasted 7 minutes. He counted by his own pulse. Then it stopped, completely, and the quiet that followed was the kind of quiet that comes after a decision has been made and the making of it has cost something. Madame Yoon returned 20 minutes later. He felt her come to stand in front of him, and he tipped his face up toward her, and she signed, with hands that were still not entirely steady. The Han family called. They want you returned. She paused. Then her hands moved again, slower, deliberate. He said no. That was all she gave him. But her face, he could not see her face, but he could read the quality of her stillness, the way her breathing had evened out into something that sounded almost like relief, told him that whatever Sunwoo had said, it had not been gentle. And it had been final. The evening moved slowly after that. Jiho came and pressed himself against Haewon's side on the sitting room couch, which he did now sometimes, this quiet gravitational pull between two people who had both learned that the world was loud in all the wrong ways. Haewon rested his hand on the boy's head. Neither of them needed anything from the other except the fact of being there. He did not expect Sunwoo. The music room was dark. He did not need lights and no one turned them on for him unless they wanted them for themselves. The piano was cool under his hands when he sat. He played nothing deliberate. Just let his fingers find what they found, something slow and unresolved, a melody that circled back on itself without landing anywhere. The bench shifted. Not Jiho's weight. He knew Jiho's weight now, the specific lightness of a small boy trying very hard not to take up space. This was different. This was the weight of a man who had decided to sit down and accepted fully what that decision meant. Right beside him. Close enough that Haewon could feel the warmth coming off the arm that was not quite touching his. A pause. Then the notepad was pressed gently into Haewon's hands. He found the pen. Waited. Sunwoo wrote. Haewon's fingers moved across the words. They will not touch you again. I want you to hear that from me directly. Haewon held the pad for a long moment. Then he wrote, Why? He gave it back. He felt the slight change in Sunwoo's breathing when he read it. The silence stretched, not uncomfortably, but with the particular weight of a man choosing his words the way a person chose footing on uncertain ground. Then the pad came back. Because I knew the moment I saw you. Haewon stopped breathing. He sat with those words under his fingertips and the melody he had been playing dissolved completely. Because there was no room in his body right now for music. There was barely room for air. He was aware of every millimeter of distance between his arm and Sunwoo's arm. Aware of the warmth of the keys under his left hand. Aware of the way his pulse had climbed, swift and ridiculous, up into his throat. Then Sunwoo's hand moved. Slowly. With complete intention. And it covered Haewon's where it rested on the piano keys, not gripping, not demanding, just covering. Warm and still and certain. Neither of them pulled away. The room held them there, in the dark, two men sitting on a piano bench with their hands overlapping and an entire unspoken world between them, and Haewon felt something inside him open that he had kept locked for so long he had stopped remembering it was there. It was not comfort that frightened him. He had been frightened by cruelty his whole life, and he knew exactly what that felt like. What frightened him now was how much he did not want this to end. The question had been living in Haewon's hands for 3 days before he finally let it out. He signed it in the middle of the morning session, directly, without building up to it, because he had learned that building up to hard things only gave them more room to become something he couldn't say. His hands moved before Sunwoo had finished the morning's update. He signed, "What do you actually do?" "Not the estate. Not the legal businesses. The part no one names out loud." The room went very still. Sunwoo looked at him for a long moment. Not the calculating stillness of a man deciding how much to hide. Something else. The specific, heavy stillness of a man who had been waiting for this question and had decided, before it arrived, what kind of man he was going to be when it did. He reached for the notepad. He wrote for longer than he had ever written before. His handwriting, which was normally precise and spare, pressed harder into the paper this time. When he finished, he pushed the pad across the desk and sat back and crossed his arms and looked at the window, not at Haewon, which told Haewon more than any of the words did. Haewon read slowly. His fingers moved across the surface of the text the way his hands moved across piano keys, carefully, learning the shape of each thing before moving to the next. The syndicate. The territories. The names of what Sunwoo controlled, and what that control required. The things that had happened when people had tested it. None of it framed as honor. None of it dressed up as something it wasn't. Just facts, laid out with the same precision Sunwoo brought to everything, clean, direct, and without apology. At the bottom of the last page, one line set apart from the rest, pressed so hard into the paper the pen had scored it. "I am not a good person. But I am honest." Haewon set the pad down. He sat with everything he had just read and he let it sit in him, all of it, the weight of it, the specific gravity of knowing who you were sitting 3 feet away from in a quiet room in Seoul. He did not flinch away from it. He had spent his whole life surrounded by a family that did terrible things and called them love and called them sacrifice and called them anything but what they were. He knew what real cruelty looked like. He knew what it looked like when darkness wore the face of care. This was not that. This was a man handing him a lantern and saying, "Here is everything. Now you decide." His hands came up. He signed slowly, each word deliberate. "Did you ever hurt someone who did not deserve it?" Sunwoo turned from the window. He looked at Haewon's hands, at the question still hanging in the air between them. He was quiet for so long that the silence became its own kind of answer, and then he reached for the notepad again. One line. "Once. I have not forgiven myself." Haewon looked at that line for a long time. Then he reached across the desk. Not for the notepad. Not for the pen. He laid his hand over Sunwoo's where it rested on the desk surface and he left it there, and the contact moved through the room like a sound neither of them had made. Sunwoo went completely still. Not the cold stillness of control. The stillness of a man who had not been touched in a long time by someone who was not afraid of him, and did not know, for one suspended moment, what his own body was supposed to do with that. Haewon did not move his hand. Outside the study windows, Seoul moved through its ordinary afternoon, the distant hum of the Han River traffic, the clean autumn light falling across the courtyard's stone path, the world carrying on with perfect indifference to the 2 men inside this room who were, quietly and irrevocably, running out of ways to pretend they were not in this thing together. He had grown up watching people wield honesty like a weapon, selecting the truths that served them, hiding the ones that didn't, building entire lives on the careful arrangement of partial facts. He had never once seen a powerful person hand someone else all of their darkness, and simply wait, without manipulation, without leverage, to see what they did with it. He did not know yet what he was going to do with it. He only knew that the hand under his had not pulled away. And that he had not pulled away either. And that something in the room had changed in a way that was not going back. Sunwoo arrived at the estate at 11 in the morning and left the car running. Haewon was in the music room when it happened. He felt the change in the house before anyone came to tell him anything, the way a door in the east corridor opened with more force than usual, the rapid approach of footsteps that belonged to someone who had covered distance quickly and not for a comfortable reason. He stopped playing. Set his hands in his lap. Listened. He could not hear the conversation. But he heard the shape of it, the low, tight exchange of 2 men in the hallway outside the study, the brief, absolute silence that followed, and then a single set of footsteps moving away fast and a second set going still. Sun was stillness. The specific quality of it that Haewon had learned to read, not the stillness of ease, but the stillness of a man calculating distance and response with the speed of someone for whom calculation had always been a matter of survival. Within the hour, the house changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself. But Haewon felt it in every detail. The way the staff moved differently, with a directional purpose they had not had that morning, the way doors that were usually left ajar were now being pulled shut, the way Madame Yun came to the music room and brought him to a different part of the house without explaining why, her grip on his arm sure and unhurried but her pace fractionally faster than it needed to be. They brought him to an interior suite. Deeper in the estate. No exterior walls. He could tell by the way sound moved, closer, more contained, no road noise. Jiho was already there. He found the boy by the warmth of a small body that crossed the room and pressed against his side the moment he entered, and Haewon put his arm around him and stood in the middle of the room and waited. Sunwoo came 20 minutes later. He placed the notepad in Haewon's hands immediately. "There are people who want to use you to reach me. I will not allow that." Haewon read it. Held the pad. Then Sunwoo wrote again, below the first lines, in different handwriting, not his usual precise strokes but something slightly less controlled, like the sentence had come out before the composure caught up with it. "I'm sorry you were placed in this world." Haewon stood with those words under his fingers for a long time. He thought about the Han household. About marble floors and designer heels clicking like a countdown. About a ring pressed onto his finger by hands that were rearranging furniture. About a brother who had known for weeks and said nothing and saved himself and left. He thought about all the people who had known, in one way or another, what his life was, and had looked at it and looked away. Then he thought about a notepad already on a desk before he arrived. A warm cup pressed into his hands by someone who simply thought he might want it. A Braille's score of an unfinished song. A man teaching himself sign language in the margins of his own brutal life because it was the language the person across from him needed. He gave the notepad back. He wrote 3 words, "I know that." A pause. Then he wrote 3 more, "I chose to stay." He did not need to see Sunwoo's face. He could read the quality of the silence that followed, the specific texture of it, not the silence of a man absorbing new information, but the silence of a man absorbing something that had moved through him like a key through a lock. That night the suite was quiet in the particular way of a space that held more than one kind of wakefulness. Jiho slept against Haewon's side, finally, his breathing slow and even, the tension going out of his small body in increments as the night deepened. Haewon lay still and felt the darkness of the room and the weight of everything that was moving outside it. Then the mattress shifted. The specific, careful shift of a large frame settling its weight at the very edge of the bed, close enough that the warmth of it reached Haewon through the air. Not lying down. Sitting. The posture of a man who was not sleeping because sleeping was not what this night required. Keeping watch. Haewon understood it completely. Not as a gesture and not as a performance. As a fact. The most dangerous man in Seoul was sitting in the dark at the edge of his bed because something was coming, and he intended to be between it and the people in this room when it arrived. No announcements. No reassurances. Just the weight of a body choosing where to be. Haewon stared at the ceiling he could not see and felt that weight beside him and understood, with the clarity that came sometimes in the very late hours when pretending became too exhausting to maintain, that he had stopped being afraid of Kang Sunwoo a long time ago. What he felt now was something else entirely. Something that lived in a completely different part of his chest. Something that, if he was honest with himself, and he was always honest with himself, it was the only thing the silence had ever given him, had been there since a hand covered his on a piano bench and did not pull away. The danger was at the gate. He knew that. And somehow, with that warmth sitting 3 inches to his left in the dark, he was not afraid. The floor vibrated at 2 in the morning and Haewon was already awake. He felt it in his spine first, a deep, concussive pulse that traveled through the walls and the mattress and the bones of the building itself, the kind of impact that was not natural, that had human intention behind it. Then the house came alive around him in a way it had never been alive before. Running footsteps, multiple, coordinated, moving with military purpose through corridors he had memorized. A door somewhere slamming open. Voices, not many, but taut and low, commands passing between people who knew exactly what they were doing. Jiho woke with a sharp intake of breath. Haewon found him immediately, both arms, pulled the boy in close and set his chin on top of Jiho's head and held on. He could feel the child's heart going fast against his ribs. His own was faster. But his body was completely still, because panic was a sound and a movement, and right now stillness was the most useful thing he had. Madame Yoon was at the door within 30 seconds. Her hands found him in the dark, both palms on his face, a gesture she had never used before, direct and urgent, and she signed against his cheek, "Stay here, do not move, we are safe in this room." Then she moved to the door, and he heard the specific click of a lock he had not known was there. He sat with Jiho and he counted. He counted the vibrations in the floor, the direction of footsteps, the moments when the house went sharp and focused, and then the longer moments when it went into a different kind of silence. The silence of a situation being managed rather than escalating. He tracked the shift. He felt the moment when the urgency in the walls pulled back from something active into something finished. He knew Sunwoo was out there. He had felt the mattress empty before the first impact hit, which meant Sunwoo had known before it happened, had been awake and waiting, and was already moving when the night broke open. When the door unlocked, Haewon stood up before it opened. He knew by the footsteps. By the particular weight and pace of them, the way they covered ground without noise, the way only one person in this entire estate moved. He stood in the center of the room with Jiho's hand in his, and he faced the door, and he waited. Sunwoo came through it and stopped. Haewon let go of Jiho's hand. He crossed the room towards Sunwoo and he reached out, the way he always navigated, hands first, reading the space in front of him, and his fingers found an arm, a shoulder, the angle of a jaw. And there it was. Wet. Warm. The specific temperature of blood that was still fresh, a cut along the jawline, not deep but real. Haewon turned back into the room. He knew where Madame Yoon kept the medical kit because he had memorized this suite over the past days the way he memorized every space he inhabited, methodically, completely. He found it. He brought it back. He found Sunwoo by the warmth of him standing exactly where Haewon had left him, which meant he had not moved, which meant he was letting this happen. He cleaned the cut. Slowly. Carefully. His hands on Sunwoo's face in the dark, reading what his fingers found, the sharp angle of the jaw, the place where the tension lived, the way Sunwoo's breathing changed when Haewon's thumb brushed the edge of the wound to check its depth. Not a sound from him. Just that breath. And the fact that he had tilted his face, slightly, almost imperceptibly, into Haewon's hands. Jiho made a small sound across the room. Not fear. Something else. A child witnessing something he understood on a level that did not require words and was filing it away carefully. Haewon finished. He lowered his hands. He kept them resting at the sides of Sunwoo's jaw for a moment longer than the task required. Then Sunwoo's hand came up. Slowly. And his fingers closed around Haewon's wrist, not hard, not restraining, just there, a grip that said, "I know you are here and I need you to know I know it." His other hand rose. And he signed. Imperfect. Careful. Unmistakable. Stay. Not an instruction. Not a command. Just a man who had spent his entire adult life ordering the world around him down to its smallest detail, asking. Asking with the only word that mattered. Haewon felt the word in his wrist, in the grip that held it, in the specific quality of the air between them right now, compressed, electric, trembling with everything that had been building since a cold marble floor and a ring in a house that smelled like cedarwood and the truth. He leaned forward. He found Sunwoo's mouth with his own. And for the first time in his life, Han Haewon moved towards something. Not because he was positioned. Not because a hand guided him there. Because he chose it. Because he wanted it. Because he had earned the right to want it. The sound Sunwoo made was quiet. Undone. The sound of a man whose last wall had just come down, and who was not trying to rebuild it. His hands came up and held, carefully, like something he was afraid of breaking, and Haewon felt in the steadiness of that hold the thing that no written word and no signed language and no amount of cedarwood and still air had ever quite managed to say before now. I have you. And I am not letting go. There are moments in a story that belong to the people watching it as much as the people living it. This is one of them. Tell us in the comments what you felt right now. We are one chapter away from the end, and it is going to be worth everything. 3 weeks later, the Han family ceased to exist in any way that mattered. Not with fire. Not with the kind of violence that made noise. Kang Sunwoo did not need noise. He needed only time, and access, and the specific, relentless application of a mind that had been several moves ahead of everyone in every room it had ever entered. The family's remaining financial alliances were called in, quietly, through channels so clean they left no marks. The underground debts were surfaced and documented and delivered to the precise people who found them most damaging. Every name the Han patriarch had built his reputation on looked, one by one, the other way. No single dramatic moment. No confrontation. Just the slow, absolute closing of every door, until the only thing left was a family-shaped space where power had once pretended to live. Jaewon was confirmed abroad. He had built another life, carefully, over months of preparation, and he had not come back. He would not come back. The brother who had promised "I will always be here" and then packed his disappearance in advance and left without a word. He was alive and he was gone, and Haewon sat with both of those facts and felt, after a long time, that they did not require anything else from him. When the Han patriarch sent a message, routed through 3 intermediaries, formal, and entirely without remorse, Sunwoo brought it to Haewon himself. He set it on the piano bench. He stepped back. He waited. Haewon picked it up. He read it through his fingers, unhurried. The message was what he had expected, the careful language of a man trying to recover something he had thrown away, dressed up as concern. He held it for a moment. Then he reached for the notepad and he wrote one line. He gave it to Sunwoo. He felt Sunwoo read it. Felt the small change in his breathing that meant something had moved in him. A nod. And then Sunwoo sent the response on Haewon's behalf, exactly as written, without changing a single word. Haewon never knew what the patriarch's face did when he received it. He did not need to know. 6 months moved through the estate like a season changing. Jiho spoke his first word on an ordinary Tuesday, not to a therapist, not in a structured session, but to Haewon, sitting beside him on the piano bench, when Haewon played the chord wrong for the 3rd time and Jiho, unable to contain himself, said wrong in a voice so small and so certain and so long in coming that Madame Yoon, standing in the doorway, had to press the back of her hand to her mouth. Haewon went completely still. Then he played the chord wrong again, deliberately. And Jiho said it again, a little louder. Wrong. And Haewon started laughing. Not a sound, he never made a sound, but his shoulders shook and his face opened into something that made Madame Yoon's eyes spill over completely. Sunwoo heard about it from Chanwoo, who had heard it from the kitchen staff by way of Madame Yoon, and when he came to find Haewon that evening his hands were in his pockets and his expression was the particular expression he wore when something had moved him, and he had not fully decided what to do about that yet. He sat down across from Haewon in the study. He looked at him for a long moment. Then he signed fluently. His signing was fluent now, smooth and certain, the vocabulary of a man who had committed to a language the way he committed to everything he chose, completely. He signed, "You did that." Haewon signed back, "Jiho did that. I just played the wrong note." Sunwoo looked at him in that specific way, the way that was not the cold boardroom assessment that the rest of Seoul received from him, but the other way, the one he kept for this room, this person, this space between them that had been built out of notepads and braille music scores and hands that learned a new language because the person across from them was worth the learning. He signed same thing. The concert was small. 40 people in a private hall, not a performance hall, a living space in the estate repurposed for the evening, with chairs arranged in careful rows and the kind of lighting that felt like late afternoon even at night. Haewon had written the composition over 4 months, on the piano and in braille notation, building the piece that had begun as a fragment on a bench the first week he arrived. It had grown the way things grew when they were finally given room, organically, honestly, following its own logic rather than someone else's expectations of what it should be. He sat at the piano in a room full of people he could not see and he played. He could feel the room. The quality of its silence, not the indifferent silence of a house that had learned to close around him, but the silence of people who were listening with their full attention, who were leaning forward, who had stopped the ordinary running commentary of their own minds and given it over to the music entirely. He felt Jiho in the front row by the warmth and the specific stillness of a small body doing its absolute best to be completely quiet. He felt Madame Yoon 3 seats over by the way her breathing went uneven and then steadied, and then went uneven again. He felt the room the way he felt every room, in its temperature, its pressure, its sound, and this room felt like something he had not known a room could feel like. It felt like his. He played to the end. The last note hung in the air for longer than notes usually did, as though the room was holding it. Then it faded. Then the silence became a different kind of silence entirely, the held-breath silence of people who were not ready for something to be over. He found Sunwoo afterward the way he always found him. Not by sound or by logic, or by anyone guiding him there. Just by the particular quality of a presence he had learned so completely that his body moved toward it the way a compass moved toward north, without being told, without needing to be told, because some directions simply became part of how you were built. Sunwoo's hands came up, signing slowly, deliberately, with the fullness of a man saying something he had been carrying for long enough that he was done carrying it. He signed, "Best decision I ever made." Haewon stood in front of him in the warm light of the concert hall, in a room full of the people who had become, without announcement, the family he had never been given and had somehow found anyway. His hands had come from trembling against his thighs in a cold marble entrance hall to this. To a composition he had written. To a boy who had said wrong in a voice that broke a 2-year silence. To a man who had taught himself a language in secret because the person across from him deserved to be spoken to in the language they lived in. He raised his hands. And he signed back the thing that was true and had always been true, from the first moment a notepad appeared on a desk before he arrived, from the first cup pressed warm into his hands, from the first note of a song that turned out not to be just a song at all. Me too. And that was the whole of it. 2 words. Signed in a language built out of the hand's own need to be understood, and the only 2 words that had ever really needed to be said. The city had feared Kang Sunwoo for years. They had spent their energy watching his hands for weapons and his eyes for warning, and they had never once looked at who was standing beside him. The quiet man, the still man, the man the world had called inconvenient and thrown away like something with no value. That was always their mistake. You cannot determine what something is worth by what the people who discard it say about it. You can only know by watching what happens when it finally lands in the right hands. Han Haewon had the quietest voice in every room he entered. He always had. And somehow, out of everything and everyone in the city, in this world, he was the only voice that Kang Sunwoo had ever really heard. This story belongs to everyone who was told they were too quiet, too broken, too much trouble to love. It belongs to everyone who stayed in a room they deserved to leave, and everyone who is learning, slowly and with great difficulty, what it feels like to be chosen on purpose. If this story moved you, if any part of it landed somewhere real, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story on this channel. Every week there is something new here, built for you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what Haewon and Sunwoo meant to you. Tell us what stayed with you. Tell us what you felt when the notepad was already on the desk, when the hand covered the piano keys, when the word stay was signed in the dark. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this one, someone who has been told they are last, they are extra, they are the inconvenient one, share this with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for a person is show them what it looks like when someone finally, truly, refuses to look away. We will see you in the next story.